Louisa, we are so excited that you're here. We're both personally fascinated with your work. And I'm actually so curious, where did your interest for brain health start? And why do you think it's so incredibly important for all of us to take care of our brain and understand our brain?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. My interests began when I was 19 years old. I was doing an undergraduate degree in exercise physiology, and I went into a cadaver lab, and we were doing, human bioscience at that time, and we got to see a brain, and we actually got to, dissect it and cut open. And I just became absolutely fascinated. And it was at that point where I decided I need to just dedicate my entire training and career to this one specific organ. And it's just opened up so much more than what I ever thought it would. And, to answer your question, why is it so important? I think we've seen a huge uprise in the last 5 years of people now taking the brain into serious consideration. Post 5 years ago, most people were really just talking about exercise and their body. And I have to tell you that your body would not function. When you go to the gym, you think that you're bicep curling with your arm, but actually it's the brain that is signaling your arm to flex and to contract those muscles. So your brain is literally responsible for everything we do, from what we see to how we hear to the thoughts that we have to every single thing you are, even down to the spouse that you choose, is a result of how your brain is functioning, how it is structurally adapted to your environment. So I think your brain is, in my opinion, and cardiologists like to fight me on this, it is the most important organ in the entire body.
I think that younger people take their brain health for granted. They don't think that these changes happen in their brain until they're much older, but we know that changes in the brain can happen at any point in our lives, and especially with things like Alzheimer's and dementia, those changes can happen in their 20s and 30s even. So what are some of the top things that young people are doing that are destroying their brains on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, Kaya, that's really important. I'll just piggyback off what you said. You said the Alzheimer's and dementia in the 30s. It's not happening then. We're not getting diagnoses, at least in part right now, of these neurodegenerative diseases in our 20s and 30s. However, the brain degradation seems to begin at that stage because it takes a lot to completely degenerate the neurons in the brain, which are the nerve cells. And you think about the brain and the nervous system, right? We've got around 87 billion neurons. The neurons are the electrically active cells in the brain. And they are the ones that we see that over time begin to break down and atrophy. So we begin to lose neurons around the age of 30, and that's just a normal part of brain aging. But we do see that through lifestyle interventions and factors such as lack of sleep, lack of proper nutrition, lack of great and critical exercise, we don't feed the brain cells what it needs, and they begin to break down. And not just that, we do have this subcategory of individuals around retirement at around 65 years of age. They begin to see loss of neurons then as well, just because they're not engaging in activities like socialization, thinking, processing speeds. So they begin to atrophy. So we know that the brain really has this motto, use it or lose it. So you have to use every part of your brain in order for it to keep functioning over time. So some of the things that I think that most individuals are not taking seriously, we'll say that in their 20s and 30s are, and this is in my opinion, alcohol. Alcohol is something that we're finding out now. Okay, alcohol is bad. We know that. Whether people think it's bad for weight loss, whether people think it's bad for sleep, it is an absolute detriment to the brain when you think about it. So when you ingest alcohol in the form of ethanol, it ends up becoming acetaldehyde, and acetaldehyde is like poison in the brain. And we know that it can definitely interfere with the white matter structures of the brain. They are the myelinating part of the neurons. They are responsible for conduction speed, the way that we think and process information. We know that we get losses there. We know that it interferes with the gray matter of the brain. That is the cell neuron body. So we know we're interfering right there. But there's also this, I would say, this flow on effect, because what happens is we ingest alcohol, yes, it becomes a poison to our brain and our body. But what it also does is it completely blocks the two most important stages of sleep, which is REM sleep and deep sleep. REM sleep being the most prominent one that it blocks. When we block sleep, we don't end up activating these signaling pathways that sleep gives us, such as the activation of the glymphatic system, which is literally like a sewage system for the brain. So we've got that effect. Now, if we don't get that, what happens? Well, if we don't get the clearing out of amyloid beta, which is a hallmark of Alzheimer's disease, and also these other neurotoxins, what happens? They build up. And then that affects the next day processing of our brain. So it's not the fact that, oh, I'm going to have a drink and that's okay because I'm in my 20s or 30s. It's not just the alcohol itself or the one drink. It is what are the after effects of alcohol? We've got lack of sleep. Then we've got the whole insulin resistance that comes with the lack of sleep, and it's just and then it just becomes much harder the following day to say no to alcohol. So that's the first thing. I also think, which I'm not going to get into, that people are wildly misinformed about THC, thinking that that also helps sleep. It actually diminishes sleep. I don't care what anybody says. Marijuana is not helping you sleep. That's the next thing. Thirdly is we do have to bring up the exercise talk, because I know many people are somewhat being physically active in their 20s and 30s, but are they doing the right thing? And they doing it at the right times? And are they doing it with the right amount? So exercise is fundamentally crucial and important, and it is necessary for the survival of neurons, and also is giving your brain a lot of blood flow. So if we can do this, if we can keep these interventions up, and if we can have and maintain a healthy environment and lifestyle, we can have a healthy brain aging process.
I'm so glad that you brought up all of those things. And I know you said you won't get into it, but I have similar views on THC, especially after seeing people in my own life go through their own versions of marijuana-induced psychosis, and it being like a very real thing. So I appreciate that you brought that up. But I want to go back to the alcohol part of it, if that's okay with you, because I'm wondering, at what level does alcohol impact our sleep? Because we talk to a lot of women who unwind with a glass of wine every night. So are they having those effects of impaired sleep at just that level, or is it more?
Oh, absolutely. No, just one drink of wine, we see impairments of sleep. And like I mentioned earlier, what does actual sleep and impairment mean? You see alcohol as something that is helping you sleep, but what it's actually doing, it's sedating you. It may be calming down your nervous system, both the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. We see that, obviously. You lower your inhibitions. We get lowering of the inhibitory centers in the brain. We've got decompression of the nervous system. So you feel calmer, but calm and relaxed doesn't necessarily mean sleep. We know that in surgery, which when you go in, you will get an injection of a sedative, maybe propofol, which is sedating you. It's exactly what alcohol is doing. So when you're sedated, you're not going into sleep. These sleep stages, which are fundamentally what sleep is. We've got 4 stages of sleep, or 5 stages, depending who you're speaking to. And the most important ones are the slow wave deep sleep, which is stage 3. Then you've got REM sleep, stage 4. And you can see, if you wear an Oura ring or a Whoop strap, you can see the diminishing returns of just one glass of alcohol. I have to tell you, and I'm not a drinker myself. However, I do enjoy a glass of red wine every now and then. And I got to tell you, when I have even just one glass of red wine, my REM sleep absolutely plummets. So when my REM sleep plummets, what is REM sleep responsible for? It is responsible for learning, memory processing, memory formation, but it does a lot more than that. It is emotional first aid. So I'm going to wake up the next day, and granted, lack of sleep, lack of the activation of the glymphatic system, and you see this emotional first aid taking place because you may not be able to say no to certain things. Inhibitory control, no to the donut, no to the chocolate, no to your spouse getting you mad over something completely unuseful. So you have to think about it like that rather than just thinking about it's one glass of wine. It relaxes me.
I definitely noticed that, similar to you. Here and there, I don't mind a nice glass of wine, but it's not worth the repercussions, at least now in my 30s, if my brain is atrophying. And one thing that you mentioned actually in another interview is you said that you wake up and your brain is primed for negativity and fear, and you have to turn on the happiness. And when I have that one drink or I don't eat as well, I notice that negativity and fear, especially when I wake up, is completely heightened. So can you talk more about that? Because I'm sure a lot of people would resonate. That morning time is always sometimes tough.
Yeah, there is a wonderful theory in neuroscience that really tells us that our brain is responsible for two things, and that is reproduction and survival. And if we look back into our evolutionary times, we know that around 40 years old, this is when, past reproductive years, maybe 45, that's when we actually were dying. We weren't surviving past those years because that's when reproduction stopped. Now with the invention of pharmaceuticals, we're now living past, we've got penicillin, we've got antibiotics, so we're now living a longer life. But your brain is still a primitive organ. It is responsible for survival. So when it sees a threat, in this, if you look at the nervous system, you've got the peripheral system. You've got the central nervous system, it's the brain, and the spinal cord, the peripheral nervous system, and all the nerves that come off of that and go into our organs and our muscles. Within that, we've got a subcategory, which is the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight and that rest and digest. And at any given time throughout our 24-hour period throughout the day, we are balancing the two. So we are like this on a seesaw, and our brain is always trying to just balance us out. So it's always seeing a threat. And when it sees a threat, that need for survival, which, by the way, prehistorically, that was a lion running after us. It was the tiger about to attack us. So what our brain would do is they'd see the threat, activate the sympathetic nervous system, which gives blood flow to necessary areas, shuts down blood flow in other areas that are not needed, such as reproduction. And it will just tell us, survive, run away from the tiger, survive. Nowadays, we are seeing that from just a text message, because obviously I'm in Manhattan, you guys are in LA, you're not going to see a tiger running after you. So the threats now are a threat of maybe walking outside and getting hit by somebody. I don't know, the threat of an ex sending you a message. I'm not sure what people, but a notification that you don't like. And so we are constantly in this fight or flight. So we have to fight that with every part of energetic force that we have. And where does that come from? It comes from how well our environment, our internal environment is for survival. So if we are at the mercy of our phone, at the mercy of these threats, that's the way. If we don't have enough energy, brain energy, if we haven't slept well, if we're not hydrated, if we're not eating well, then your brain is always going to choose survival first before happiness. So you have to wake up every day, whether it's a spiritual process with intention, which I've just started, by the way. Many people think, do their intention work, or whether it is a physiological process. You have to start somewhere, and you have to give your brain the best outcome for the day, which is, I know there's going to be 1,000 threats in front of me, but I'm going to fight those off. But you need energy to do that.
That definitely resonates, because you're right. In our modern world, threats look different. It could be an alarming text or an email that you get, or a family member asking you a difficult question, right? And we are so numb to think that's life, but you're right. Those are hitting you so early and are threats to your nervous system, your brain. And, you talk so much about exercise, and you mentioned earlier that people do exercise, but they're not doing the right kind at the right time with the right amount. So tell me more about this, because I think I got it all wrong. So I'm taking a lot of notes when you talk right now.
So, look, any exercise is good. I want people just to understand that, because what we need for the brain to survive over time is blood flow. And the brain is the most vascular rich organ in the entire body, meaning that if you were to pull apart all of the vasculature of the brain, it would span over 400 miles. So that's pretty extensive. And every neuron needs blood flow. So ergo, blood flow is good. Therefore, exercise is great for the brain. We know this. We see this in academic studies when you look at the association between, let's just say, cardiovascular training, long runs. We see massive amounts of blood flow being excreted to the brain and to the organs, and that is very good. Now, the CDC recognizes physical activity and the necessity of the CDC said that we need to do 150 minutes at minimum of aerobic physical activity. And I think they mention also 150 minutes to 300 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity per week. And that is wonderful. I would lobby against that and say that we actually should be doing at minimum 300 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity per week, because that would be the combination of both resistance training and cardiovascular training. And I always separate the two because we see massive amounts of benefit from the two. When we look at the studies that are being done on cardiovascular training, okay, the long distance running, we see blood flow, yes, but we also see the secretion of this really wonderful neurotropic factor, which is BDNF, and brain-derived neurotropic factor, which some people like to refer to this as fertilizer for the brain. I don't, but it is a growth factor. We know that in mouse models and in humans, we see that when it's pushed out into the brain, especially when we see it in the hippocampus, which is the memory part, it's this seahorse-shaped structure deep within the temporal lobes, which is responsible for our memory formation and memory consolidation. We see that new neurons in that area can actually grow just through doing long amounts of running or exercising. So I think that that's really important for us. Again, for the long-term health of our brain, but also we see this implicated. There's wonderful research that where they take mild cognitive impairment patients. MCI is a pre-dementia state where they put them on a protocol of actually running for 3 hours a week or doing, long bouts of exercise. And they see that they're increasing the size of the hippocampus. The actual volume is growing. So exercise is wonderful for that aspect. Another thing that maximal amount of exercise does. Okay, so right then I was just talking about zone 2 training. Around 65% of your maximum heart rate. But the research that is done on maximal exercise is really, really fundamental. It is, and it's really beautiful, actually. Ben Levine, he's a wonderful cardiologist and researcher. What he did was he took 50-year-olds, 50-year-olds, and he subjected them to 4 hours of a maximal exercise per week, maximal aerobic exercise. And when I say maximal, I believe, don't quote me on this, I think he was focusing on around 80 to 90% of somebody's maximum heart rate, which is hard, right? And doing that for long periods of time was, it is very strenuous. But guess what he found? And this was over a 2-year period. He found that they had reversal of the age-related decline in the heart. So your heart is, it's this organ that pumps blood throughout the body, and obviously blood returns back to the heart. But what happens over time, just due to aging, is we get something called left ventricular stiffness. So the left ventricle seems to hypertrophy. So the muscle around it seems to get thicker. That means that there's not a lot of blood flow that can go in and out and improve stroke volume over time. And that's detrimental, right? Because we need a lot of blood that gets perfused to the body and to the brain. We need that over time, and we need that to be efficient. He found that these 50-year-olds, when he scanned their hearts, he had a reversal of 20 years. These hearts of the 50-year-olds looked like 30-year-old hearts. That is unbelievable. That study really solidified the importance of maximal training for me. So, which is why now I really focus in, for me and everybody who comes to Neuro Athletics, our clients, we really focus on VO2 max training.
So that's incredible. And we are hearing basically that exercise is so cardioprotective, it's so neuroprotective, but it's funny, this morning, my husband, before our toddler woke up, he wanted to go to the gym. He's been trying to go to the gym all week. Work is crazy, kids, this and that. And then he got to the gym and he came home and he said, gosh, I always feel so good when I go work out and I forget. How come I forget each time? So what is it that is preventing us? People are not even meeting the minimum requirements. So what is it that is preventing us day to day from getting this movement that we all love afterwards? No one regrets it. Everybody loves the way they feel. But what are the obstacles in the way?
Well, other than what you just said, kids, time, environment. Okay, we'll take that out of play and take a more neuroscientific point of view. What did I mention earlier? Our brain is responsible for what? Survival. When you go to the gym, provided you're doing it correctly, when you go to the gym, you are inflicting a threat to your brain and your nervous system, because that is the only way that we adapt. The only way that you adapt, the only way that you grow and get fitter is when you place stress upon a system. It's Charles Darwin's theory, right? We need to place stress upon a system in order for it to adapt and grow. But that stress, your brain doesn't see it as, oh, this is good. It sees it as a threat, that quote unquote good stress versus bad stress. We've just got this allostatic stress load, right? So if you go to the gym and it's really super hard, and actually we see this with, elderly individuals. I'll take my parents, for example, late 60s, and God, the fights that we have are only around exercise. We have literal threats of death in my family. I tell them, listen, if you're not exercising today, I'm not coming home and seeing you guys for Christmas. And because they're older and they haven't spent their entire lives like me exercising, so it's very hard for them because they'll go out and train, or I'll get them a personal trainer. They'll come back and they've worked so hard that it's stressed their body so much that it basically signals to their brain, that's a threat, don't go and do that again. So it's very hard for them to put that aside and tell their brain that this is healthy, so this is good. So that's one part, I think it is. The next part is, look, we've got this dopamine circuit that, gets activated when we do something in pursuit of a goal. So if we stop that, we don't have the ongoing excretion of the dopamine, which is the one that's going to push us to go and do better, push us to go to the gym. So there's so many different factors at play. But what I can tell you is this: the first month, 2 months, 3 months is going to be hard. But if you get into a rhythm and it becomes like life support for you, it will be better. But you really have to just dig deep and just get there, put everything aside and just get there, which is what I had to do this morning, to be honest.
It's so interesting. So many of my friends are also entrepreneurs or high performance people like, you and the world that you're in. And one theme that I see so much is they all exercise. And I'm still trying to dial that in for myself, like the planning, the consistency. So even talking to you, seeing the behind the scenes of their lifestyle, I'm like, that is the main thing. And I'm curious, Louisa, what would you say are maybe some of the biggest myths that women or people have around exercise?
Oh gosh. Well, women, I think, and I don't understand why women are afraid of lifting heavy weights. Maybe it is they see a photo and they think, if I lift weights, I'm going to be as big as her, when it is so hard to grow muscle. In order for them to really get as big as the photos that they're looking at, they're going to have to be eating tons of protein per day and lifting extremely heavy. So I think that's one myth that they have. I don't know, maybe you can tell me another myth that I can dispel for you, but that's the biggest myth that I'm finding that people are doing. And then also I will go to the other end of the spectrum and tell you that the ones who are going to the gym, both men and women, are absolutely not working to their capacity. I see many people in the gym, both men and women, I'm not going to just single out women here, lifting weights where they're not actually getting to the point of fatigue, that's where we need that adaptability, right? And I've interviewed, I'm not in that space, purely the hypertrophy space. And I've interviewed many people in nutrition and hypertrophy space who always mention that you have to be pushing heavy. So how many people do we see just going aimlessly to the gym and they're on their phones and they're just on the treadmill, just walking? Walking is great. I love it. I'd much rather everybody do it outside. But another myth is just going and just moving your body is going to have an effect. It's like, it's not. You really need to be pushing hard at the gym to get the beneficial effects of resistance training, for example.
I'm curious if there's any myths that you've come across in your research around exercise and pregnancy. Right now, I'm 26 weeks pregnant, and in Ayurvedic medicine, they say, oh, don't work out too hard while you're pregnant. There's too many risk factors, and you hear that quite a bit. And then you hear the opposite end of it, that it can be so beneficial for pregnancy. So I'm wondering for anyone like myself who you always have like a little bit of fear, but you know that it's good for you and you want to push yourself. Are there any myths out there that you can dispel around that?
Look, I do know, I can't name any studies off the top of my head, but I do know that in what I've seen, that is a myth. I've seen, I think it was Dr. Kyle Gillette actually who mentioned on my podcast that he has taken women like to full term with seeing them exercise and specifically doing CrossFit. And it is beneficial. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure where the cons lie and the negative aspects of it, but without going too deep into it, without knowing too much, but I do know that it has been seen as being very beneficial for for pregnancy.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit and go back to sleep. I know we've kind of talked about that and the importance of it throughout the podcast. And I want to talk more about the amount of hours to sleep. Yeah, let's talk about that.
So controversial, but I do think that every human needs to be sleeping at least 7.5 hours per night. I think the 8 hours came in to play because you need probably half an hour or 15 minutes to really wind down and get into sleep. But the people who think that they are surviving and performing at their peak from just 6 hours of sleep may just be running on adrenaline. You know, there is a subcategory of individuals, I'm talking very small percentage of humans in the world that possess a genetic form where they don't have to sleep that many hours, but that's a very, very minor amount of the population. So we all need to be sleeping at minimum 7.5 hours per night. And I wouldn't just say sleeping, right? I think we're now smarter than that. I think we should just really decompress sleep into, like I mentioned, deep sleep and REM sleep. And we know that REM sleep should really be made up of around 20% of total sleep time. And I really like the benefits of the deep sleep as well at a 2-to-1 ratio. So you really want to have maybe around 40% of your total sleep time made up of deep sleep. So it's not that we need total sleep time as this amount. It's that we need to hit certain time frames and percentages of REM sleep and deep sleep to have the effects of sleep.
I love that you also talk about how you got to treat sleep like a sport, because so many people are like, well, how do I get that deep sleep? And you talk about warming up to sleep, which is something my husband kind of talked to me about. That was game changing for my sleep habits. But yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that, because I think it could be super helpful.
Gamifying sleep has literally changed my life and the life of all of my clients. And we see this because one really great thing that I started to introduce into my sleep environment, if you will, we can call it sleep fitness, is the change in thermal temperature. And we've got ambient temperature, which is the temperature of the room. Then we've got thermal temperature, which is your body, right? The temperature of our internal system. If we can start, so I started like playing around with this, and I sleep on a temperature controlled mattress, and I started to play around with this. And we know that in order to fall asleep and stay asleep, our core body temperature needs to drop at least 2 degrees. So I started gamifying the system and started like dropping the temperature of my bed really down and like measuring the sleep quality the following day. Sometimes I got too cold and I experienced frequent wake ups. But then when I got it just right, I got to tell you, my sleep latency, which is the time that it took me to get sleep, was decreased. And then getting into deep and REM sleep was increased. So I love that aspect of it, but I also think that if you treat it like a sport and warm up for it, then you just get so many more benefits. For example, warming up, our lights out in Neuro Athletics is 10 p.m. That's hard, by the way. If you've got, I don't know, depending if you've got children, if you've got a busy and hectic life, that means that we have to start winding down at probably 8:30. 9. If you take a supplement stack, which can also be part of the gamified theory, you can start taking those 20 minutes before bedtime. And then the best part of everything is we have wearable technology. So you can now look at your stats every morning and you can see, were the protocols that I set last night good for my sleep? Were they not? You can change it up, because you can't optimize what you don't measure. So how do you know that if you measure something from a protocol, you need to understand, like, you need to be able to change it as well. And so that becomes fun. And I think that fun ends up making it more inviting to, I'm so great at, like, when I go out for dinner, of saying no to drinks, right? It's so natural for me. But go back 5-6 years ago, I would kind of get scared and intimidated because people will be like, why are you not drinking? Like, why don't you want to be part of the group and the family? Like, are you in AA? But now I'm excited because I'm like, if I have that drink, I'm going to see my deep sleep and my REM sleep plummet tomorrow.
Yeah, I hear you talking about it being 10 p.m. I'm like 8:30, 9:30, I'm asleep. 8:30, I'm like,
oh, wonderful.
As soon as my daughter goes to bed, I'm like, time for me to wind down because I know what it feels like when I don't have that period of wind down and I don't go to bed before 10 p.m. and I feel so awful. I can't even go there. So I would love for you to talk about sleep aids. What are your thoughts about using different sleep aids for people who struggle with falling asleep or staying asleep? Are there any challenges with sleep aids?
Yeah, so like if we talk pharmacologically, inducing sleep, if we've got the actual prescription drugs, they are, in my opinion, like I would stay clear from them because they're not helping you sleep. They're actually just sedating you, just like the alcohol. So we want to stay like really, really clear from the prescription ones. But if we go to OTC, we look at over-the-counter medications, or even we look at melatonin, for example. I looked over there because I've got a bottle right now. I don't take melatonin. I only take it when I travel. I've just gotten back from Australia. I'm trying to get back on EST time zone. So I'm really, really like strong on taking melatonin for the first 3 days just to align my clock. So that's when I think it's useful to take something like melatonin. But I would caution people against it for two reasons. One, because it will, over time, it will block the natural effects of secreting melatonin. Melatonin is also a hormone. I want everyone to know, the same as estrogen and testosterone. We can't just freely go and get testosterone over the counter in a pharmacy, right? So just take that into consideration. You'll block the natural secretion of this hormone if you just keep taking it exogenously. And then the second thing is, I don't know if you guys saw this, but there was a study that came out that showed that a lot of the melatonin bottles are actually lying. You'll see the label strapped on at 3 milligrams of melatonin when they actually have 100x the amount in there. So maybe you're taking 300 milligrams of melatonin, which is a huge bolus of this hormone, right? Which is just stuffing up the gland. So you've got to take that in consideration. What's another sleep aid? I'm talking purely supplementation now. What do I find great is GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid, which is our chief inhibitory neurotransmitter. It literally, can slow down or block the transmission of these neurons. And I think that's great for anybody who has a racing mind. I think magnesium L-threonate is wonderful. I take magnesium L-threonate about 3 or 4 times a week. I don't want my body to get used to it, but when I take it, oh my God, my deep sleep is just, I'm like in a coma. So no, I wouldn't say that actually. I'm in a very, very deep sleep state, and I see that on my stats the following day. I think rhodiola and ashwagandha are wonderful. I take rhodiola 3 times a day, and I do this specifically it's an adaptogen, and it will adapt to my cortisol levels and other levels as well, but it will bring it down because cortisol is just, I'm filled with it, especially being here in New York City. So there's many different sleep aids, if you will. And then you've got the other ones, like I sleep on a temperature controlled mattress. I monitor sometimes the environment within my actual bedroom to see what is the carbon dioxide levels. People don't have to do that. I'm just a bit crazy. My apartment's like a lab.
I love it. I'm curious, outside of sleep, what would you say, maybe for a high performing brain or your own personal favorite, what's your favorite supplement?
I mean, my favorite one, I'll caution this. I just put a reel up that went, it ended up getting like 3.5 million views because it's very simple, really. It is creatine. Creatine and omega-3 fatty acids are, without a doubt, my 2 most favorite supplements for brain health. The first one, creatine, helps with cell energy metabolism. We see that creatine can be beneficial in the brain. It's not just good for the body, it's also good for the brain at around 5 milligrams per day. So wonderful, 5 grams per day, I should say. Wonderful for the brain. And the other one is, of course, omega-3 fatty acids, which has many effects, not just for the survival and health of our neurons, but also we see that it can really bring down inflammation. And that's why I'm taking 2 grams in the morning of EPA, DHA, and 2 grams at night. And in fact, we have around 20% of the lipids, of the fat portion of the brain, 20% of the fat that makes up the brain is made of DHA. DHA comes from omega-3 fatty acids. We've got EPA, DHA, and ALA. So we're literally feeding the brain what it's made of. And this can be given to anybody regardless of an omega-3 fatty acid status. You can check your omega-3 status via an omega-3 index. Dr. Bill Harris formulated this test, which tests the omega-3 fatty acids in a red blood cell. You can check that. If you are below 4%, you're probably part of the majority of the US population, which is scary. You really want to be above the 8% range, which I'm 10.5. I'm trying to even get it further up.
Wow, that's incredible. I remember reading some stuff from them or actually listening to them about how the people who are in the lowest range of omega-3 index essentially are as much at risk as smokers.
Correct.
In terms of just like overall.
All-cause mortality. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
That's, you've got many risk factors for all-cause mortality. Smoking, hypertension, but they've just included, I think this was 2 years ago, where they actually included a low omega-3 index as part of that.
So incredible. And what about in terms of anxiety? Because you mentioned GABA before, and I remember I was when I was in grad school and I had exams around like biochem or anything related to math, I would always get really nervous, and so I would take GABA sometimes. It really helped me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it really helped actually. I would take cortisol manager, I would take GABA, and I just felt a lot better. So, are there any things around habits or supplements in terms of people who are experiencing anxiety?
Obviously, if anyone is experiencing anxiety, you will definitely go and get that checked. Speaking to somebody is also always going to be good. I don't want people to turn to supplements as the answer to everything, because it really isn't. If you just look at the word supplement, it's just there to supplement what you're doing already, which is going to be coming from physiological practices and behavioral practices. I always say that first. So anything that is really going to calm down your nervous system, to push you out of fight or flight and just to balance you out and get that seesaw back to homeostasis, is going to be good. So specific supplements for anxiety, I probably couldn't tell you. However, anything that is going to, the adaptogens such as rhodiola, ashwagandha, probably at night taking myo-inositol and GABA as well can calm you down. But when it comes to anxiety, whether it's chronic or generalized, it's always going to be, in my opinion, physiology first. How can I tackle this through my nervous system? It could be via a double inhale, exhale. It could be maybe getting out and just running, or it could just be journaling. Really, me personally, when I'm experiencing any form of anxiety, which is never for me chronic, it's usually due to the situational result. Maybe I'm nervous or I'm anxious, I've got no time. It's generally actually for me time. Yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. I'm like, as someone who is a high performer in New York, I know Kay and I both lived in New York. Like, I was a whole other type A person there. I'm like, I'm already kind of crazy, but in New York, I'm like another level. What are some practices that you do to kind of calm your nervous system? So you kind of mentioned earlier, you're trying intention setting when you wake up, but any other hacks that have really helped you kind of balance that nervous system and support, brain health?
Yeah. Apart from the obvious, okay, on our pyramid, we've got exercise, we've got sleep, then we've got nutrition. Everything else is an accessory. You think of a little cupcake. That's what the cake is made of. The icing is ice baths, saunas, red light therapy. I'm doing all of that as well. I've got an ice bath in my apartment, so I'm doing ice baths almost every day. Saunas, probably 3, infrared sauna 4 times a week. And then the other things that I'm doing is I'm intentional about breath work at around 2 p.m. So probably when I get off the phone or when I get off this podcast, I'll do my breath work, which aligns me back into the present moment, brings down my nervous system. But one of the best things that I do, I walk. This is because, yes, I live in Manhattan, but I'm also doing, I call them therapy walks. I'm walking about 25,000 to 30,000 steps a day. But there is a specific protocol that I do. I have to do this. I do a 1 hour walk without any devices. So that means I can't be at the mercy of a notification, which, by the way, if I'm doing my therapy walks and something comes up that I don't agree with or don't like, that's going to affect me.
I love that. And one thing, you were just talking about red light, and I was telling Kaya this the other day. I was feeling like I needed to kind of calm down between meetings and podcasts. I felt just like I needed a second breath work or whatnot. And I put my head in front of our red light. We have this small one in our house. My husband's like, just lay in front of it, put your brain on there. Because I felt so exhausted. And I said, I need my brain for this next call that I have. I swear it was so helpful. What is going on? Like, what was happening in my brain with that red light? Because now anytime I feel fatigue or I need a reset, I will just sit in front of this small red light and I'm convinced that it's helping. Is it actually making a difference in my brain?
Oh, well, look, okay. There is something really, really amazing in science. It's called the placebo effect.
Yeah.
You could be experiencing that, or you could be experiencing the real thing, because we're now seeing red light therapy actually intranasally, like going through your nose and shooting up to your brain, which is having an effect on stroke patients. So I think that that's really valid. From an actual red light, what we're seeing, the science of it is the red light can actually penetrate the skin and go into the superficial organs of the body. Whether it can go into your brain the way you've done it, I'm not sure, but it does help with hair. So you're doing something there with hair follicles. So that's the first part of it. I love red light because of the effects that it does, but more so because probably when I'm sitting in front of it, I just feel calmer. I also turn the red lights on at night because it's not blue light. That also comes, brings down the nervous system as well and puts you in a calm state.
Talking about the nervous system and how we are kind of inundated with all of these inputs all day, which definitely has an impact on our nervous system. I would love for you to talk about, so much of what I see now on the internet, so much of what a lot of us see is this kind of world of hyperreactivity where people are just ready to pounce on other people. They're people that they disagree with. It's just like a very hyperactive place that we are currently living in. Can you talk about the link between hyperreactivity and our brain health? Like, what is going on in our brains that we are in this environment where we feel like we're on attack all the time?
It is literally, we are at the mercy of our nervous system each and every day because everyone has accessibility to you. If you look back 30 years ago, you think, did people have the ability to just come up and say whatever they wanted to your face? No. Even today, I dare say that if we had no phones, people wouldn't just be coming up to you and just giving you their opinion for no reason. So it's made easy and simple with this device. And everyone is always afraid, what is he going to think of me? What is she going to think? If I put something out there, is it going to be, you really have to understand that you are putting yourself on I hope you're referring to social media here and people not just coming up to you and forming attacks on you.
I haven't had that happen to me in real life. So yeah,
I haven't either, which is funny. And I will put up something on social media and I can't even tell you the percentage, but I'll get a lot of people who will say things. And I think people just use that as an outlet. I think if you know who you are and you know what you're doing and what you're putting out there is valid and you're not hurting anybody and it is aligned with what you're saying and you really can't be affected by that. It takes more than just understanding the health of your brain to know how to fight off these negative comments. But also, why are we also so reactive? I think because we're living in a time where now our attention span is getting shorter and shorter because of our phones. We're seeing this in children who are staying up all night on TikTok. And our ability now to, that threshold, that stimulus is becoming really, really small. And that's what I think is worrisome. How many times have I heard, I would say in the last month, adults over the age of 25, I'll classify that, saying that they've been diagnosed with ADHD. 20 years ago, were adults being diagnosed with ADHD? No.
Well, I'd love, Louisa, I feel like we could talk to you for hours. I'd love to maybe end on one last question. It's been such a fascinating interview, but why do you think women in particular should pay extra attention to their brain health?
We have something in neuroscience called neurosexism, which is we're seeing, and it's something that we should talk about, where we're using a one-size-fits-all approach, whereas we shouldn't. And a lot of the studies that have been done on men, and this is across the board, not just in neurology. We're seeing most studies being done on men, but women, those who were assigned female at birth, those who were born with ovaries and a uterus, I just want to be clear on gender there. Those who were born with ovaries and uterus possess more estrogen receptors in the brain. Therefore, when we hit a certain age, we'll call this postmenopausal age, which is different for everyone, 50, 55 years or and above, we do see we don't secrete estrogen anymore. Therefore, we are at the mercy of these neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's disease. Out of every third case of Alzheimer's disease is a female. So females have to be extremely crucial of their brain and the health of their brain due to the fact that we have this neuroendocrine system that is very different to our male counterparts. So ladies out there, you should be taking everything into consideration. You should be taking your supplementation, your nutrition, your exercise, and by God, please sleep. So that's my answer.
I love it. Well, thank you, Louisa, for joining us today. This was so much fun. I learned so much with you always, but we're excited and so appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.